or will they have an IEP if they're in tier 3?
You don't have to. You don't not necessarily.
Okay.
Often, though, when a kid's at that level with behavior, you might be considering it, but you will have gone through everything.
At this point, you have been in many meetings on this child by the time you get to tier 3, which will be the SAT meetings. So, and there have already been interventions in place. So at this point, the discussion about evaluation for special education services has probably already.
And if there is special education services, these interventions are long-term rather than your short-term.
Okay, so we're going to switch over to the academics. Tier 1 is high-quality core curriculums, and it's general education. The most important thing is it's in the general education classroom. There's a positive school climate to develop the social and emotional within the curriculum and align with the curriculum, and then there's differentiated instruction, which we're going to talk about. This is just the framework, but we'll talk about differentiated instruction. Tier 2. So this is for students who are not meeting the benchmarks at Tier 1 level. The interventions are supplemental, meaning that they are still involved in the regular education classroom. They're still getting all the same instruction. They have access to the exact same curriculum as the other students. They are getting something additional. So it's in addition to everything that happens at Tier 1. It's consistently scheduled. Ms. Elizabeth alluded to this when she was talking about the behavior side. So it meets about 3 times a week, 30 to 45 minutes, and there's a determined period of time. So we're going to try this specific strategy or these specific strategies for 6 weeks. At the end of 6 weeks, we will have collected data. We're going to sit back down as a team. We're going to look at the data, and we're going to make some decisions. Has the skill been developed? The targeted skill, has it been developed? Have they met mastery, whatever we determine mastery to be? Is the strategy no good for the student? Do we need to reconsider and come up with a new strategy? So we have that kind of discussion at the end of the 6 weeks or 8 weeks. 20 weeks is excessive. That's more like a tier 3, but it can go for as long as the team decides. The sessions can be one-to-one or they can be in small groups. And the good thing about this model, it doesn't have to be like only 3rd graders or only 2nd graders. It's whatever kids are struggling with that skill. So it can be multi-grade, multi-age, but the skill is what the kids are trying to reach. And of course, at some point you say, well, I probably should put the 1st grader with the 5th grader. So you make those decisions because developmentally that would just be not the best scenario. But you can go across grades looking for kids that have deficiencies in those skills. So it could be one-to-one or a small group. And the most important part, I think, about Tier 2, which is why Connecticut has specifically renamed theirs to scientific research base, is there has to be fidelity to the intervention. So whatever the strategy, whatever the intervention you're putting in place, for instance, next year we're using LLI, right, which is a literacy intervention. You have to follow it exactly the way it's supposed to be followed. You can't, like, I'm going to do this piece, but I'm not going to do that piece. I'll do this part, but I'm not, because you won't get the results. You have to, there has to be fidelity to the intervention. So you have to follow it exactly the way it's designed. If not, you're probably wasting time. So any questions about Tier 2? And remember, this is about 10 to 15% of the student population that goes into Tier 2. Questions, thoughts? Yes?
This person, please correct me if I'm speaking out of turn, but this is really where, at least we've tried to use PPSFs
Exactly.
to really implement these Tier 2 interventions. So it's really important that the PPSFs understand they're playing a really crucial role in implementing these, and that the teachers, you know, have to plan from their side to really utilize the PPSFs. We could easily just have our PPSFs just hang out in the classroom all day, but it's really strategically placing them and using them so that we're making the most of their support in the classroom.
Absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that. Okay. Again, it's supplemental. We're not removing the core curriculum. They're still involved in it. At this point, we may be talking about a referral for special education. and looking at supplemental services that will allow the kid to access the curriculum. So, you know, are they having speech issues? Is it physical issues, some maybe OT? Do they need test accommodations? So I guess what I really want to say about tier 3 is when you get to this level, you're starting to look at the child a little bit different. This child needs something more, and maybe more is something outside of the core curriculum, but they still have access to the core curriculum. It's just making them as comfortable and prepared as possible to access it. And again, sessions can be one-to-one. Typically at this point they're one-to-one, but they can be small group. And as Elizabeth said, it's for a longer period of time. So again, the interventions are scientifically research-based. There's fidelity to the intervention, but instead of looking at a kid and collecting data for 6 weeks, maybe we're going to look at them for 12 weeks. We're going to give them more time to be able to internalize the strategies so that they can build the skills.
And part of that too is you're putting in specific academic goals in place, or if the kid also has behavior stuff, you're putting in goals for that too, goals and objectives that are scientifically, measured or whatever. And I guess if you did gifted, right?
Oh, I'm sorry, still forget. It's the core of our program. I keep forgetting to talk about it. Yes.
Right, that would be not necessarily. This could be, sessions can be one-to-one or small groups. Kids who are gifted tend to work better in homogeneous grouping, where everybody in the group is also gifted.
At this point, it's sometimes recommended that they might be skipping a grade or going into, like, on a high school level, they might be going into an AP classes or something to that effect at tier 3. At the tier 2, they would be in that tier for giftedness, more of the group situation where they would work on a project that lends itself to the core curriculum, but something more independent and maybe a little bit deeper than what the curriculum does.
And for us, tier 3 is our CTY, Center for Talented Youth. For those kids who have tested in, are eligible to participate in CTY through Johns Hopkins. This is a tier 3 intervention for them. So they have access to it for math, and then on the humanities side for reading and grammar. They can take the reading course, or they can take the grammar. 4th and 5th grade can take, 5th grade can take grammar, grammar fundamentals. So that's a great example of tier 3, allowing them to participate in CTY so that they are functioning at their level and not being held back. And Athena's gonna put all those lovely things in place next year, right? So that's tier 3 on the academic side. And I think now we can, go ahead. Oh, SRBI and special education. So it doesn't replace the special education process. These are just additional supports that we're putting in place for kids that have not been identified. If they've already been identified and they have an IEP, they already have a plan in place. They have the strategies listed, the goals, the objectives. The special education teachers will come up with the strategies that they're going to use. So this has already been in place. This is already in place if they have an IEP. It does not replace special education. At any time that a parent thinks that, their child is having difficulties learning that are beyond the norm, they can request that their child be evaluated. If we think that the child is having difficulties beyond what's, developmentally, recognizable, we first have to go through SRBI before we can ask that a kid be evaluated for special ed.
And that's important.
That's important.
We need data.
Right. So we have to go through all this. We got to do the 6 weeks interventions, the 8-week interventions, the 12-week interventions. It's very long, and we have to collect a lot of data. And then at that point, we can call the parents to the table and say, listen, we've tried this. Your child is not responding to these things. And so at this time, we like to have them evaluated to see if there's something else going on. if a parent decides that, my child is not being successful in the classroom, it could be day 2. They can walk in and say, I want my child evaluated, and we have to take them through this evaluation process. So that's why it's so important that the teachers are, 1, using interventions with fidelity, 2, keeping track of all of the data. Because sometimes you have to start all over again. And the sad thing about that is that time is ticking, the school year is going on, and the child remains lost. So, okay, so that's, I think, the most important thing on that page. Cannot be used to delay or deny this evaluation when the referral comes from the parent. So we can't stop and say, oh, but wait, I just put together a nice SRBI model for your kid. Let me have a chance to get, no. As soon as the parent says it, you got to go to the evaluation process. And then the data can be used. The data that we've been using in SRBI would be brought to the table to talk about why we think the child should be evaluated for special education services. Any questions about that? Okay.
And just because a kid has and anybody who's taught knows, just because a kid already has an IEP, doesn't mean all that differentiation for that student is not going on in the classroom.
Okay. That's just a title page.
Oh.
All right, so what is differentiation? Differentiation are teaching strategies that meet the varying needs of a group of students within a general education setting. So it is not one size fits all. A lot of times what happens, and I hear teachers say it, and I think it's so subconscious they don't even realize they're saying, well, I taught it. You didn't teach it if they didn't learn it. So just because you stood up there and went through your nice, neatly, put together lesson, and it was sequential, and it built from this to higher order thinking skills, and there was application, and they had to evaluate. It doesn't matter if the kid didn't get it. So if the child is not getting it, then this is what we have to do. We have to take a step back. We have to figure out where did they get lost, and what can I do? How can I intervene to bridge that gap for them? So it's not one size fits all. How teachers differentiate. So there are 4 ways that I'm familiar with, and I'm hoping I'm going to get educated here tonight. Somebody's going to tell me something good. There are 4 ways that I know that you can differentiate instruction. You can differentiate the content, you can differentiate the process, how you're teaching it, you can differentiate the product or the assessment, or you can differentiate your learning environment. So those are the 4 things that a teacher can do that I'm aware of. Is somebody going to tell me there's another one? Like the multiple intelligence we keep adding? Is there another one? Yes.
I was going to say, multiple intelligence.
That's process or product.
It could be both, right?
It could be both.
And I tried to put that there when I said learning style.
Oh yes, learning style. Okay? So we'll continue to talk about it. According to students, and this is based on students' readiness, their interest, and their learning style. Those 3 things should determine how you're going to differentiate, at what point you're going to differentiate. Any questions about that? Okay. So this just talks about what that means. If you're differentiating content, what the student needs to learn, or how the student will get access to the information. Process will be what activities the students will be engaged in so that they can master the content. Assessment, the product assessment, just, how are you going to assess whether or not they know? Are you going to give them the standard test, the end of the unit test? Are you going to ask them to be creative and to come up with a visual representation of what they learn? Are you going to, dip into the multiple intelligence and let them, show them what they are and let them choose something according to their learning style and how they want to illustrate what they know, what they understand about the content? And the last thing is the learning environment, how you set up your classroom and the spaces that you create in your classroom that allow kids to either be away from the group or to be more immersed in the group.